Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because your immediate financial future depends on this understanding. Instantly discard any thought that this video is just another cheap conspiracy theory or financial clickbait to generate easy views. What you are about to hear is the exact architecture of a crisis that the mainstream media is actively refusing to report, preferring to keep the public anesthetized. Recently, we witnessed gold plummet by $178 in a brutal and sudden move that left retail investors in a state of absolute panic. The narrative pushed by newspapers is that the market has finally corrected precious metal prices. This is a fabricated lie. What occurred was not a correction of macroeconomic fundamentals, but rather the first tremor of an imminent and devastating collapse in the structure of our market. We are witnessing a real-time evaporation of liquidity, a severe structural phenomenon that big banks prefer to hide from you. The trigger for this recent carnage wasn't a shift in the global economy, but rather the closure of the Asian market during the Lunar New Year holiday. With physical buyers from the East absent, the Western derivative system was left completely unprotected, exposing a festering wound in our financial architecture. What collapsed wasn't the physical metal resting in secure vaults, but an unsustainable mountain of empty paper contracts traded in an algorithmic echo chamber. This death spiral is designed to bleed your wealth while you naively believe the system still operates fairly and transparently. But the reality is an active systemic trap. If you felt a chill down your spine watching the charts bleed recently, know that your fear is absolutely justified and rational. You are sensing, even if intuitively, that the pieces on this chessboard are being manipulated against you in a rigged game. The freefall we are witnessing is not the market functioning, but rather definitive proof of a hidden implosion, where unbacked securities are dumped to create an illusion of abundance. In the next few minutes, I will tear away the veil of lies from the corporate media and reveal the exact mechanics of this paper liquidity anomaly that threatens to erode your savings. You are about to receive the raw perspective of an insider on how this fracture in the global market was orchestrated, and more critically, how you should position yourself before the true avalanche of losses occurs. To understand the carnage devouring your wealth, you need to swallow the red pill and see through the bizarre illusion of our financial system. What we call the metals market today is, in reality, a schizophrenic algorithmic aberration divided into two parallel and conflicting universes. On one side, we have the Eastern physical market, grounded in the hard, tangible reality of real metal. On the other, we have the Western casino of COMEX and LBMA, a sick ecosystem built on the endless re-hypothecary of derivative contracts. The security that the mainstream media sells you is a complete farce, a papier-mâché structure designed to mask the fact that there are dozens of electronic promissory notes for every ounce of physical gold available in the vaults. It's a structurally rotten plumbing system, about to explode under the pressure of its own global systemic leverage. Under normal weather conditions, this fraudulent machine keeps turning thanks to a mechanism known as physical arbitrage, which acts as a safety valve for the system. It works in a very simple and predatory way. If paper contracts in the West fall to absurdly low values, the institutional giants buy these discounted futures, demand immediate physical delivery of the asset, and profit from the price difference. It is this constant threat of physical looting that keeps the screen price minimally tied to the tangible reality of the metal. Arbitrage acts as the mechanical foundation that prevents the structure from collapsing on our heads, ensuring that the farce of electronic promissory notes does not become completely detached from real-world scarcity. However, what happens when this safety valve is abruptly closed and the pressure begins to build without any viable escape route. The answer to that daunting question materialized the moment the Asian market closed its doors to celebrate the Lunar New Year holiday. Asia, led by the relentless appetite of the People's Bank of China, is the ultimate physical buyer, the foundation that guarantees the global price floor. When these exchanges closed, the liquidity bridge connecting Western fiction to Eastern reality simply collapsed, leaving the system operating in an absolute vacuum. Without the Asians to drain the physical metal and force market honesty, price discovery instantly collapsed due to extremely low liquidity. Imagine a high-pressure pipe suddenly clogged at both ends. Internal tension surges uncontrollably, creating the perfect scenario for a lethal systemic trap, carefully prepared by high-frequency predators. At that precise moment of extreme vulnerability, high-frequency trading algorithms unleashed their devastating attacks against the West's empty order book. These predatory robots detected the absence of institutional buyers and initiated a relentless bombardment of short selling, pushing the market towards the abyss. It wasn't long before these malicious orders triggered stop losses, the automatic sell orders of thousands of terrified retail investors and leveraged funds. It was like watching a colossal row of dominoes falling at terminal velocity, a mechanical death spiral where the sale of one contract forced the immediate liquidation of another. The average investor was knocked down, completely decimated by a cold machine programmed to extract wealth from the pain of others. The cascading liquidation pulverized the optimists, sweeping away residual liquidity like a hurricane devastating an unprotected coastal city. The brutal drop of $178 in the price of gold is irrefutable proof of the fraud that underpins modern Western markets. Pay close attention to this terrifying fact. This historic meltdown did not require the sale of a single miserable ounce of physical gold. What you witnessed on your brokerage screen was, quite simply, the frenzied dumping of unbacked electronic contracts in a trading room completely devoid of real buyers. It was a liquidation of phantom promissory notes, an evaporation of paper liquidity that does not alter the meager fundamentals of the real underlying asset in any way. They are not selling gold. They are destroying leveraged derivatives to provoke blind panic and force you to hand over your real assets at liquidation prices. The system is blatantly lying to cowardly plunder your survival financial reserves. However, the mathematical illusion that pushed prices underground carries within it the seeds of its own catastrophic implosion in the very short term. It is absolutely and physically impossible to maintain this charade of depressed prices once the Asian dragons reopen their markets and demand the tangible metal at these artificially discounted values. The disconnect has reached an unsustainable limit, and the Western attempt to suppress the market through phantom derivatives will collide head-on with a brick wall called insatiable physical demand. When the East returns, hungry for tangible assets for protection, the violent repricing of the system will not be a smooth ride, but a devastating seismic shock. The trap is set, and those who fail to understand the mechanics of this impending collapse will inevitably be buried under the rubble of a financial system that tried and failed miserably to defy the implacable laws of physical scarcity. Financial history doesn't make unprecedented mistakes. It repeats its systemic traps with a mathematical and relentless precision that the mainstream media conveniently chooses to forget. If you think this bizarre anomaly of paper liquidity is an isolated and unprecedented event, you urgently need to go back to the fateful collapse of the London gold pool in 1968. In that dark time, a desperate consortium of Western central banks attempted to artificially suppress the price of gold, forcibly fixing it at $35 an ounce. They created a veritable manipulative death spiral, aggressively dumping their paper reserves into the fragile London market to mask the structural weakness of the dollar and deceive the average investor. The pattern of institutional arrogance we are witnessing today is absolutely and frighteningly identical to that which preceded that monumental implosion that obliterated the wealth of the unwary. Back then, the perverse dynamic that dictated the pace of the collapse was shockingly similar to the current financial aberration that is draining your energy. The Western system, blinded by its own arrogance, sold paper contracts at artificially low prices, trying to keep alive an unsustainable illusion of absolute control over the economy. Meanwhile, the East, coupled with the ruthless strategic vision of France under Charles de Gaulle, silently absorbed every gram of available physical metal. They knew that the American mathematical charade would not withstand the shock of reality, and they used Western manipulation itself to systematically drain tangible wealth into their sovereign coffers. Signs of exhaustion were everywhere for anyone who dared to look, but the masses, blindly trusting the reassuring rhetoric of corrupt governments, continued to hold on to illusory and empty assets. The result of this arrogance was the total and utter exhaustion of the London liquidity pool, a lethal systemic rupture that paralyzed the gears of the global economy overnight. When the plumbing finally clogged and the owners of physical gold demanded the actual surrender of their holdings, the system entered a terrifying paralysis, forcing an abrupt and humiliating market shutdown. Those who chose to ignore the clear warnings and continued betting on the promises of government paper lost absolutely everything in a fraction of a second. Soon after, we witnessed an explosive and violent upward revaluation of gold, crushing the short sellers who bet against real scarcity and immensely rewarding the hoarders of the physical asset. History teaches brutally and mercilessly that when financial illusion collides head-on with physical reality, the correction is not gradual. It is a catastrophic event that pulverizes the unwary. What you urgently need to internalize is that the destructive pattern that operated in the past is happening right now before your very eyes, blinded by the mainstream media, the insane sale of paper money in the West to suppress prices, contrasting with the voracious and silent accumulation of physical tons in the East, is a ticking time bomb. The current systemic trap will fatally end with the same and identical violent rupture that marked 1968, without any chance of salvation for the unwary. This will occur at the exact moment when the premium paid for real, tangible metal brutally detaches from the phantom futures contract, exposing the collapse of the fraud. The dominoes are already falling in slow motion, and those who choose to ignore the undeniable facts will lose everything they have built, just as the fools lost in the 1960s. Wake up before the final implosion. If you still cling to any irrational hope that governments or central banks will appear as benevolent saviors at the last minute, you need to wake up immediately to the brutal reality. The systemic trap we find ourselves in was built precisely by these corrupt institutions, and they have completely exhausted all their financial rescue tools. For the first time in our modern economic history, annualized interest payments on the monstrous U.S. federal debt have surpassed the terrifying mark of $1 trillion. This fiscal death spiral is the true hidden engine of the dollar's structural weakness, a destructive force that silently erodes your purchasing power while you sleep. The global financial system is literally bleeding to death, suffocated by the unsustainable weight of a sovereign debt that can never mathematically be repaid or refinanced on normal terms. In this catastrophic and unprecedented scenario, the Federal Reserve and major central planners find themselves trapped between a rock and a hard place, with no viable escape route. If they choose to combat inflation by keeping interest rates high, they will inevitably break the Western banking system, forcing a massive evaporation of liquidity that will destroy entire markets and pulverize businesses. On the other hand, if they try to save the clogged financial pipeline by printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, they will set the fiat currency ablaze, triggering rampant inflation that will annihilate their daily savings. There is no longer a magic reset button for this impending implosion. Any desperate attempt at systemic intervention will only accelerate the structural collapse already underway. They have lost absolute control of the machine, and what remains is only the cynical management of the inevitable decline of the financial empire. It is precisely this mathematical insolvency of governments that is forcing the aggressive repricing of physical gold as the only global reserve asset free from any counterparty risk. When the institutions that issue the currency become the epicenter of sovereign risk, blind faith in paper money crumbles and smart capital flees desperately to tangible safety. Western banks, desperate to mask this colossal capital flight, continue selling empty derivatives to try to hold the price from reality. But this dam is collapsing. You can't print physical gold on a central computer keyboard, and that's the only undeniable truth that high-frequency algorithms can't subvert in the long run. The system will try to freeze your options, impose draconian capital controls, and confiscate your virtual wealth before admitting its own moral and financial bankruptcy. The mainstream media will never warn you about the emergency protocols already being silently tested behind the scenes of corporate and governmental power to trap your money. When the disconnect between the paper market and physical reality becomes insurmountable, the first reaction of the bankrupt state will be to violently close the emergency exits. Prepare to witness account freezes, brutal restrictions on withdrawals, and extreme capital control measures disguised as protection packages for national security and economic stability. Every move the system makes to try to plug the holes in the hull of this sinking ship will create an exponentially worse and more destructive problem for the average citizen who trusts banks. The illusion of liquidity will evaporate overnight, leaving millions trapped in an institutional trap designed to socialize massive losses. You are completely alone on the front lines of this silent financial war, where the intelligent individual is hunted by a broken system desperate for liquidity and survival at any cost. The multi-billion-dollar deals occurring in the shadows between Eastern nations disregard the daily volatility of Wall Street. They project a severe shortage that will destroy the complacent West. Large institutions are preparing for a collapse of biblical proportions, hoarding tangible assets while distracting you with irrelevant fluctuations and empty narratives on television. Trusting that the architects of this disaster will protect you at the moment of final implosion is the biggest and most lethal mistake you can make in your entire financial life. The institutional siege is closing rapidly, and your window of opportunity to escape the clutches of this death spiral is shrinking with each passing second. The time has come to stop bleeding with the herd and start profiting from the structural collapse the media is hiding. The disconnect between the Western screen price and the real macroeconomic fundamentals has created a rare and explosive asymmetry in the market. Your downside risk is limited by the imminent voracious reopening of Asia, while the upside potential is brutal due to an inevitable short squeeze. Your first asymmetrical move, your ironclad defense, is the uninterrupted accumulation of physical gold and silver. You must hold these tangible assets strictly outside the traditional banking system, eliminating any counterparty risk or institutional confiscation. The free-falling price that terrifies amateurs offers you an artificial subsidy paid by paper shorters to acquire the true store of wealth. Ignore the volatility of the futures contract and focus on scarcity. Your second move abandons the defensive trench and launches a surgical attack on what we call the return vacuum, or the market's elastic effect. While the doors of Shanghai and Hong Kong remain closed, Wall Street predators are driving down prices, creating a brutal window of opportunity for the savvy investor. You should position yourself tactically by buying extreme weakness in highly leveraged instruments at the true prices of precious metals. The specific target here is junior mining ETFs, codes like GDXJ for gold and SILJ for silver. These assets have been decimated by the evaporation of paper liquidity, but are the first to explode in value when physical reality crushes the algorithmic illusion. By buying these discounted positions now, you are literally acquiring the geopolitical and inflation risk premium for mere cents on the dollar. The third and final asymmetrical play requires absolute composure to exploit the temporary blindness of Western funds before the next FOMC decisions. The broken system is pricing in a scenario that will never occur, and you will profit from this fatal error by using long-term call options on major metals ETFs like GLD and SLV. The derivatives market delivers you bullish contracts at settlement prices, grossly underestimating the inflationary death spiral and the relentless force of Asian buyers. This is the essence of intelligent counterflow. You enter the room while panic drives out the amateurs. These three tactics are not mere financial tips, but your shield and spear against a cowardly systemic trap, mathematically designed to transfer your hard-earned wealth into the hands of the global financial elite who orchestrated this disaster. What we dissect today is not an isolated event that will be relegated to history books, but the first chapter of an ongoing and relentless financial collapse. The evaporation of liquidity that destroys the unwary is happening right now, operating in the shadows of a system designed to devour your wealth. That's why I'm not going to ask you to simply enjoy this video as if it were mere useless internet entertainment. You need to subscribe to this channel immediately to follow the unfolding of this monumental crisis in real time, side by side with those who understand the gravity of the situation. We are your early warning radar, your inexhaustible source of tactical intelligence against an expropriation machine that never sleeps. This space is the ultimate trench for the intelligent individual who refuses to be the next victim of a brutal systemic trap. As long as the mainstream corporate media continues to bombard the population with anesthetizing narratives and comforting lies about global stability, the death spiral will silently accelerate. They want you to remain docile and ignorant while the architects of disaster position themselves at the exit gates, laundering the world's physical wealth. By confirming your membership in our community, you guarantee exclusive access to a vital stream of undeniable truths that television networks are forbidden from reporting. You will receive visceral and surgical updates on every institutional tremor, every financial plumbing failure, and every movement of Asian capital. We monitor the pulse of the implosion so you are never caught off guard when the paper market terminally collapses. Continuous intelligence is the only frontier separating the financial survivor from absolute and irreversible ruin in this new scenario. We are at the epicenter of a silent war between the mathematical illusion of the West and the tangible hunger of the East, and the battlefield is your lifetime's worth. With each new Asian holiday, with each doctored economic report, the system tests the limits of our patience and attempts to force a mass capitulation of retail investors. Participating in this community means you won't face the sharks of Wall Street and predatory algorithms blindfolded. Every notification you receive from our channel will be a tactical alert, a red pill designed to disarm the emotional traps the system will try to use against you during panic. Your commitment to the truth is what strengthens our network of sentinels, creating an army of investors vaccinated against state lies and prepared for the apocalypse of fictitious liquidity. Now, I need you to look at your own financial reality and answer a critical and deeply personal question in the comments section below. How much of your hard-earned wealth is still trapped in the paper illusions of the banking system, and what exact percentage have you already converted into physical, secure assets outside of this counterparty risk? I want to know if you have already begun your escape process or if you are still hesitating at the slaughterhouse gate, waiting for a government miracle that will never come. Describe your defensive strategy, discuss it with other members of this community, and share what obstacles you are facing in protecting your family. The debate we generate here breaks the spell of the media, exposing the flaws in the machine and accelerating our collective liberation from the shackles of a market corrupted to its core. The countdown to the violent repricing of gold and silver has already begun, and the tension between the sovereign individual and the broken system has reached a point of no return. The magic window to acquire tangible assets with the artificial subsidy of Western fraud is closing relentlessly and at an accelerated pace. Keep your mind sharp. Question absolutely all the data that the authorities try to shove down your throat, and always remember that fear validated by reason is your best weapon for survival. Subscribe, activate notifications, and take ultimate control of your destiny before the next wave of algorithmic liquidations sweeps away the rest of public trust. We will continue to monitor the markets, debunking fraudulent narratives and mapping safe escape routes amidst the impending chaos. See you on the other side in our next urgent update.